So we got a good episode today. As a part of our international series, I'm going to interview a lot of experts and well-known figures from the low-carb, keto, or carnivore community. Today I got Dr. Anthony Chaffee with me, and I'm thrilled to hear what his opinions on some upside and downside of the carnivore diet, ketogenic diet, and low-carb diet. So, Dr. Anthony Chaffee, how are you doing, man?
Hey, very well, thank you. How are you?
Good, good.
Good.
I know that you advocate especially for a diet that is mostly, I think, merely animal-based.
Mm-hmm.
And
sorry.
yeah, I would like to dive in with you just a little bit. Like, how did you get to this, and why did you start it in the first place? I know that many people, like I do, I got to it. It was kind of a necessary change for me, like to deal with my type 1 diabetes, and that eventually, as I said, I gained control over that situation, like that is very complex. But did you had anything special to treat, or just you were curious?
Yeah, so for me, it wasn't because I was feeling unwell, and there weren't really anybody people out on the internet talking about this. Actually, it was sort of before the YouTube got really big. Really, about 22 years ago, I was taking cancer biology at the University of Washington in Seattle for my undergraduate degree before medical school, and we learned just the toxic nature of plants and how they use defense chemicals in order to defend themselves. And this is just basic botany, and something that actually we learn in rudimentary biology classes in junior high school. At least I did. About how plants and animals are an evolutionary arms race, and plants becoming more and more poisonous, so less and less animals can eat them, so they can survive and thrive, and then animals becoming more and more adapted to specific poisons in specific plants, so they can eat that plant and survive and thrive, and that becomes their evolutionary niche, their dedicated food source, and they don't have to compete for resources as much. Like a koala, they just eat eucalyptus. Almost nothing else eats eucalyptus because eucalyptus are very toxic to all other animals, essentially. But the koala can't eat other plants either, because those plants are toxic to a koala. So they have to stick to their specific food source. So we were learning this from a cancer perspective. And we were looking at the numbers of carcinogens that were in just normal vegetables that we would get from the market every day. And we learned 22 years ago that we had already discovered 136 known human carcinogens just in Brussels sprouts alone, and over 100 in mushrooms, just white normal table mushrooms, and spinach, kale, lettuce, celery, cabbage, cucumber, broccoli, you name it. All of these things had 60, 80, or over 100 known human carcinogens each. And they were quite abundant. We've known since the 1980s from the work of Professor Bruce Ames from UC Berkeley that there are 10,000 times more naturally occurring poisons, pesticides, insecticides, natural insecticides that the plants use to stop insects and animals from eating them, to 10,000 times more by weight than the industrial pesticides that we spray on them, because the plants were defending themselves from bugs and predators long before we ever started cultivating them. And they found that, Professor Ames found that the naturally occurring pesticides, so the naturally occurring toxins in the plants, were up to 500 times more likely to cause cancer than the pesticides that we spray on them industrially. And so this is why we still have those pesticides, because they were shown to actually be less toxic than the plant itself. And so we were quite blown away by that. And I remember looking around wildly. So this must be a joke. Someone must be in on the joke. But no one was. Everyone else was just as surprised as I was. And I remember thinking in my head, like, well, but vegetables are still good for you, though, right? Even though they have all these toxins and carcinogens in them. And my professor just looked at us, and he just sort of gave us this funny look and said, I don't eat salad. I don't eat vegetables. I don't let my kids eat vegetables. Well, plants are trying to kill you. So I said, right, I'll stop eating plants. And so it wasn't because I was sick or unwell and I'd heard that someone, you could heal these sorts of things by changing what you eat. I just learned that plants were toxic, and they're trying to defend themselves like every other living thing in nature. And so I said, nope, not going to eat any of that. And so I switched to a fully animal-based diet. I started eating only meat and eggs. And that's it, because those were the only things I could find that didn't have plants in them. So I wasn't looking at, okay, I'm just going to be a carnivore and only eat meat. I went around the grocery store and tried to find things that didn't have plants in them. And everything had plants in them. Obviously, every packaged meal will have plants in it. And the only things I came across, I said, well, eggs, okay, eggs don't have plants in them. Meat's not from a plant. Like, great, okay, I'll just get eggs and meat. And I had some dairy as well occasionally. But that was it. And so I did that for a number of years, and I felt remarkably better. My athleticism and my performance in school, as well as on the field, just went through the roof. So I was playing rugby at a very high level, and my athleticism and my fitness and my overall performance, it really just went to all new heights. You know, if anyone, you know, the people that were around me at the time would constantly comment on how fit I was and how explosive I was, because I was really much more fit than anybody else around me, even at, you know, the national level, international level. And so it was a very big game changer for me. And when I was playing at a professional level in England, that's when I started slipping off doing that, because there wasn't the same access to food, and sometimes it was just difficult to cook, and just being very busy. I was buying meat that was already cooked, but some of it was breaded or had like crumbs on it. And I remember just sort of thinking to myself, I was like, well, is it that big of a deal? It's a bit of plants, but, you know, dose makes the poison, and maybe it's not that much harm. And, you know, you can always convince yourself of a silly idea. And so that was me convincing myself. And I did actually feel worse. I remember a couple months into it, thinking to myself, like, why don't I feel as just superhuman amazing as I normally do? Am I just not working out as hard? Am I not pushing myself? Or, you know, I'm 25 now. Am I just over the hill? Am I dying? And it's just that's it. And looking back, that's when I slipped off and started eating a little bit of plants again. But the main thing that did is it changed my mindset from I will eat no plants ever to, you know, maybe a little bit is okay. And it was a slippery slope from there to go back to just eating basically normal, standard sort of diet, but, you know, whole foods, not processed foods. I never really went in for that, and always very, very meat centric, but I still incorporated in vegetables and some carbs and things like that. And then about 5 years ago, I came across information that really showed me that no, humans really are carnivores. That's just the kind of animal that we are. And like any animal in nature, if you feed an animal something that it doesn't eat in the wild, something it doesn't that it hasn't you know, been developed to eat, it gets very sick.
Evolutionary, you mean?
Exactly, yeah. So if it hasn't evolved to eat a specific food, then that food is bad for them, right? If you look at parks or zoos, there's always signs that say don't feed the animals. You feed them something that they don't eat, they'll get very sick. Okay, but they don't tell you what they get sick with. But they get obesity, heart disease, liver disease, diabetes, cancer, autoimmune issues, arthritis, and all the rest of the things that we get. Dogs and cats are known carnivores, and yet we give them grain and plant-based kibble, and they get all of those same diseases, and we call them human diseases. And veterinarians are now saying about how the prevalence of human diseases, so-called human diseases, in the domestic pet population has increased dramatically, and it's continuing to rise up. Well, those human diseases used to be called diseases of the West, because we only saw them in the Western European cultures that then went out around the world and went and colonized and explored around, because these indigenous populations that were only eating meat, they did not get these diseases. Like in North America, even most parts of South America and Australia and you know, many other places, they were not getting these diseases. Now we're calling them human diseases because just everybody gets them. Everybody gets diabetes or heart disease, dementia, all these things. They're just normal. It's just part of aging and your body just decaying. That's not how nature works. Nature doesn't, you don't just come into existence in young adolescence and then you just decay and die. That's not how it works. You know, you'll get eaten, you'll get killed by something if you're going through that model. And so actually animals are very, very strong, very robust, and they live to be, well, unless they get killed, they live to be a great age, and then they just sort of keel over. You know, animals in the zoo, they're in a little box about the size of a room, And they're not fat. They look very strong, healthy, fit, and lean. And that's because they're being, well, if it's a responsible zoo, they're being fed what what they would eat in the wild if they given a choice. And so that's what I think is harming us, is that we're animals and we're not eating our biologically appropriate species specific diet, which is meat. And that is propagating a lot of diseases that aren't actually diseases per se, but what I believe is toxicities and malnutrition, right? So toxic buildup of a species inappropriate diet and a lack of species specific nutrition. So namely, too many plants, not enough meat. And I think that as doctors and patients, we should really understand that this is not a disease process that you need a pill for. This is a toxicity exposure process that you need to remove the exposure. And I think that would help a lot of people. And in fact, when you do that in practice, it does help a lot of people.
Yeah, that's very, I couldn't agree more. And it's very interesting for me to hear it from you said like you got to it from a scientific point of view. It's not like you have some heartbreak story of a disease like I do, and that many today in nutrition world, they're trying to sometimes to find, even if it's not that true, like a story that they were a fat kid or anything. So I like the fact that you just came from the field, and it's nice to hear. But actually, because you are an athlete, I have a lot of subject that I want to talk to you. Also, I'm as a personal trainer for now already 13 years and more, and soon I'm a clinical nutritionist. So that will be interesting to hear, like your. Soon I will finish and I will get the diploma, and then I would like to dive more like to the clinical experience that you have, because you see a lot of patients, you are a medical doctor, so both of these are interesting. But if to start from, I have one really common question that I see all the time, also in the groups in Israel, like the carnivore, the low carb, the keto, all of that, and I see it also in the US and Australia. It doesn't matter. Everybody asks, how can you build muscle or gain body mass when you do not eat carbs? You rely only on animal product.
Yeah, that's funny too. Because, I mean, that's just something that gets repeated so many times that people just start to listen to it and believe it, and then this gets in textbooks. There's a lot of that in medicine. It's actually quite surprising that the more I dig into this and the more I've realized that we've really been misled in the whole diet and nutrition space, especially with cholesterol, saturated fat, and just basically all the recommendations in the last 40 years, all the official recommendations anyway, that we've really been misled, and these were based on very, very poor information, if not just pure supposition or fraud in many cases, actually, to do with cholesterol. So this is sort of one of those things. Someone made the suggestion you have to have carbs, you need carbs in order to burn carbs, but anybody who's taken biochemistry knows that that's not true. After 24 hours of not eating carbohydrates, your insulin drops to a certain level, and you are able to make blood sugar, liver glycogen, muscle glycogen, gain ketones, and you're able to mobilize those from your fat stores. And because you're mobilizing from your fat stores, even a very lean individual like yourself will have weeks of energy available to them. So you will never run out, really, ostensibly in any sort of realistic exercise, unless you're very emaciated. You can starve yourself long enough, of course, but it will take a while. Yeah. And so when you're eating carbohydrates, you actually shut that process down. When your insulin, you raise your blood sugar, your insulin will go up correspondingly, because blood sugar is actually harmful to you. It actually harms us. The glucose molecules physically fuse to other molecules called glycations, a non-enzymatic bonding of that carbohydrate to other molecules, and it damages them and causes them to not work properly. This is what kills diabetics. It damages them from the inside, and they break down slowly over decades, and they die young. And so your body is trying to protect you from that. And even though it is protecting you, people are still dying from this. But the way it protects you is it raises your insulin. So it's trying to get this down. And so your insulin goes up, has a long half-life, usually stays up for around 24 hours if you have a big carbohydrate meal. And when that goes up, that blocks lipolysis, that blocks proteolysis. Namely, it shuts down access to your fat stores and only allows you to run on the carbohydrates that you have available. So in layman's terms, it turns you into takes you out of a fat burning metabolism and puts you in a fat storage metabolism. And so that's problematic when you're exercising or just going throughout your day, because now you can't access your fat stores. You've put a lot of energy into your fat, but now you can't actually access it. And so when you run out of blood sugar and liver glycogen and muscle glycogen, you will hit the wall. You'll feel very tired. Your blood sugar will go down. And you'll say, I have to eat, I have to eat, I have to eat. So you have a couple hours of glycogen available to you. And so you will run out of that quite quickly. Whereas if you are only eating meat or just even in a ketogenic diet and your insulin's low, then you're able to access your fat stores, and you can just go perpetually. And this is why people do intermittent fasting as well, because you're just running out the clock on that insulin. You're waiting out that, and then you make blood sugar and glycogen and ketones. So it's, anybody who understands biochemistry should understand that point and realize that we will make a perfectly adequate amount of carbohydrates. There are entire civilizations alive today that never eat carbohydrates throughout the course of their entire existence. The Inuit, the Nanette, different African tribes as well. They just eat meat or drink blood. The Mongols, like Genghis Khan and the Mongol horde, they're still sort of living like that now. But during Genghis Khan's time and his his sons and descendants' times, they were just eating meat. They were just eating horse meat, drinking horse blood, and some fermented mare's milk products. They took over the largest contiguous empire that's ever existed, most of Asia, most of Europe, and they held it for hundreds of years, and only eating meat. And these guys were monsters. These guys were like on average 6'4", and you read books about Genghis Khan and how dominant they were in wartime. A lot of it was attributed to the way they ate, because they were very well nourished. They were very well fed, whereas they're fighting against peasant armies that are just getting gruel and things like that. And so they just weren't matched up in that sense. But they were also they have to stop 4 times a day and cook, and they had fires and all these sorts of things. So it was very burdensome. Moving an army around is very obvious where these people were. Whereas the Mongols could just go up. They didn't have cook fires. They didn't have fires at night. They didn't have to stop 3 times a day. They just went, and then all of a sudden they just showed up and wiped out an army. So there's a lot of advantages to this, specifically to building muscle. Think of it this way. Muscle is meat. Animals are meat. We are animal tissue. We are animal flesh. We are meat. When we eat, we're trying to build and maintain meat. So what has all of the nutrients, nutrition, and ingredients to make meat? Meat, right?
Yeah, obviously,
we don't have to have play games of chemistry with plant material and try to turn plant material into animal material. We're just getting animal material and taking it straight across. So you're getting all the protein, all the cholesterol. People don't realize how important cholesterol is for muscle building. Cholesterol is the precursor to all your major hormones, such as testosterone, estrogen, progestogens, cortisol, your glucocorticoids, mineralocorticoids. Everything made in your adrenals all comes from cortisol. There's something like 27 intermediary hormones in between cholesterol and testosterone that they sort of change successively, and you get to testosterone, and then that's turned into estrogen. Every single one of
cholesterol,
cholesterol, yeah. So cholesterol is at the beginning. So cholesterol gets turned into. So there's about 27 chemicals in between cholesterol and testosterone, and so every single one of those intermediary steps are all hormones. They all have a biological role in your body. They are all derived from cholesterol. Like pregnenolone, DHEA. Those are things that we people more commonly hear about from the supplementation side of things. Those are precursors to testosterone, but they have a specific role in your body as well. They all come from cholesterol. So that cholesterol is very, very important as well. We make it, but we only make about 70% of what we need. So we need to get more from our diet. And saturated fat is a very, very good energy source. It's very energy dense, and we are able to run on ketones. It's very efficient to run on ketones, especially for your brain and your heart. Your muscles need glycogen, but you replenish your glycogen, and that's the thing that people don't understand is that through gluconeogenesis and other processes, you are actually replenishing your blood sugar and your glycogen all the time. So Whereas if someone carbo loads and fills up their liver with a lot of glycogen, it's been shown that they'll have 3 times the glycogen as say I would, right? Because I don't eat carbohydrates. However, my glycogen level stays rock solid. It does not move. Whereas theirs will go down. And because their insulin is high, they won't be able to replenish that. So eventually they'll hit the wall. They won't be able to make any more energy. And that's what people say. They hit the wall. They run out of energy. They can't go anymore. But if you push and you push and you push and you push, then you can break through the wall, get your second wind and your runner's high. People say this just feels amazing and you can just work out and run forever. What that is biochemically is that you've eaten carbohydrates, your insulin is up, and you've run out of glycogen. And your blood sugar is dropping, and you can't access any other of your fat cell stores. And so you feel rotten. Most people stop there. But if you keep pushing, normally it takes insulin about 24 hours to drop down and for you to kick over into your proper metabolic state where you can access your fat stores. But if you keep pushing, you can actually force that because you'll die otherwise, right? You're not able, you have to be able to mobilize energy. And so once you do that, you basically go into the state that someone in ketosis will be in all the time. So I live in my second wind. I'm always in my runner's high. So I always feel great. And when I'm working out, the more harder I work out, the more energy I'm burning because my body will just produce what, sitting here talking to you, my body's producing the exact amount of energy I need to sit here and talk to you. If I start working out, it will increase my energy production to meet the demand of what I'm doing. And so the harder I work, the more energy I'll burn and the better I'll feel. I mean, this is why people take stimulants and amphetamines and things like that, because it actually makes you feel better when you burn more calories. And so when you're burning energy, you feel better. So the harder I work, the more energy I burn, the better I feel, the harder I want to work. And that in turn makes me burn more energy and feel better. So it's this positive feedback loop. And I just want to push myself and push myself and push myself because I actually feel better doing it at the time. And as far as muscle building is concerned, I mean, look at the golden era bodybuilders, like Gironda and Serge Nubret and things like that. They were just steak and eggs guys. They just ate like steak and eggs. Serge Nubret would eat 6 pounds of horse meat a day. And this guy was just absolutely jacked. He was Arnold Schwarzenegger's body idol. When Arnold Schwarzenegger was coming up, he idolized Serge Nubret, and he actually got a lot of his, sort of techniques from him. And he actually was a big steak and eggs guy as well, even though he, slandered himself on the Game Changers diet. It's like, oh, if only I was vegan, I would have been so much better. Nonsense. He just ate meat the whole time. He talks about it in the Pumping Iron movie that he did, is that he needs to get all this meat in, but he said he couldn't eat a whole bunch at a time. So he just had to sort of eat a lot of meat meals throughout the day to meet his demands. So
you got those famous photos like black and white, the old school, like the beginnings of 1900, like these photos. I know that they were mostly carnivores, or as you say, like ate plenty of meat of eggs.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and the original Greeks in the original Olympic Games, you read records of these, like what they would train on when these athletes were getting ready for the original Olympic Games. They would significantly increase their meat intake and sort of box out everything else. They would just focus on eating meat, and even the prizes for the Olympic Games were like cattle and sheep and things like that. It was just like meat was so prized and so understood as such an important nutrient source.
Yeah, but when you talk about hitting the wall and that you always win the second, you get the second win. So you mean, I assume like by your physiques and all that, you more talk about strength workouts and less aerobic kind of exercise.
So either way, you get benefits from both. So when I was playing, rugby, professional rugby, high level rugby, I was running, sprinting constantly, and I just got in better and better and better shape, and I could push myself harder and harder and harder. And once I got into good enough shape, I literally couldn't get tired. I couldn't run out of energy, and so the harder I pushed myself, the more my body gave me. And so all I needed to do was just go, and I would have energy for it. I would never run out. I would never hit the wall. I never hit the wall. Even when I was working out, I would literally work out 6 to 8 hours a day, every single day, while in university, playing collegiate rugby and men's premiership level rugby as well. And I would play anywhere from 2 to 3 games on the weekend. I would try to get as many games as I possibly could. And so from an endurance standpoint, I could just run and run and run. And when I would go training, just doing some fitness, I would do wind sprints where I would sprint a mile, and then I'd jog half a mile. I'd sprint a mile and jog a half a mile. And I literally could not wear myself out. I just did that until I just got bored and said, okay, I've been doing this long enough, So I'd run like 10 miles and just be like, yeah, okay, that's fine, that's enough. And then I just get on. But I was not tired. I was not worn out. I could just keep going. And but also in weight training, you get very, very strong. I mean, I don't even get sore anymore after working out. I found out that I realized that the soreness that we experience after working out, like the delayed onset muscle soreness, the DOMS, those really come from inflammatory factors that are in plants, and those cause you this pain, swelling, stiffness, soreness, and even just being in ketosis, having your ketones up, they significantly reduce your inflammation in your body, and so that can actually reduce the pain that you experience from muscle soreness. And my recoveries are so much faster. If I do a big heavy leg day one day, I feel fine the next day. I could do it again. My breaks in between are much lower. Like I've actually gone back to doing some of the workout schedules of like Serge Nubret and Garanda, where they only give themselves 30 seconds rest between sets in their upper body. So they're doing bench. They're doing bench every 30 seconds, right? And they're going to failure. And so I would do that for 8 to 12 sets. Sometimes I would do, if I have time, I'll go for like 20 sets. Because I can. And for legs, they would give it 60 seconds. So if I'm doing squats or I'm doing deadlifts or something like that, I'll go to failure and then I'll do it again 1 minute later. I find that that's the only way I can actually wear myself out after sort of 8 or 10 sets, because I'm just not giving myself a chance to recover. If I give myself a few minutes to recover, I could literally go the rest of the night. I actually put that to the test once because I wasn't getting sore, and I was thinking to myself, what's happening here? Why am I not getting sore? Am I just not pushing myself hard enough? And I was like, well, I did a pretty heavy leg day. I would normally consider that a heavy leg day, like 12 sets of heavy legs of different sort of exercises. But I was like, I didn't feel jello leg. I didn't feel like I was just stumbling out of the gym. And so I was like, well, maybe I didn't push myself long enough. Maybe I just need to get to that point to where I just wear my legs out, and then I'll see if I can get sore. And so I did my big heavy 12 sets, and then I just ended on squats. And so I just decided just to keep doing squats until I wore my legs out, just so I could see if I could make myself sore the next day. I ended up doing 20 extra sets of squats on top of the 12 sets that I had already done. I just put a book on tape. I was listening to a Thomas Sowell book and on economics, and I was just listening to that and enjoying that. And I would give myself sort of 3-4 minutes rest in between sets. But I did 15 reps to failure on the first set. I did 13 reps to failure on the last set. So it was a 30-second set, right, of heavy legs. And I realized that I could just keep doing this the rest of the night.
Forever.
But I thought to myself, I was like, well, I've been here for 4 hours and I've got things to do. So I think I'm just going to stop it here and just see how it goes. And I remember thinking to myself, have I just done something very stupid? Because I've done very heavy leg days where I was much more than I was prepared for. And I was basically crippled, just couldn't walk. I was in just agony for 2 full weeks afterwards. And I had just gotten back from Bangladesh. I was doing humanitarian work in the refugee camps in southern Bangladesh, helping the escaped refugees from Burma that were escaping genocide there, like an actual genocide. They killed like 200,000 people in the Rohingya in Myanmar. They killed like 200,000 people in a month. And 1 million people fled over to Bangladesh, and so I was helping out with them because there wasn't enough people helping.
Nice.
And so I came back, and like literally, a few weeks after I got back from Bangladesh, my second heavy leg workout was that session. And so I really wasn't in shape. So I really should have just been dying from this. And so I thought, like, okay, I may be in trouble tomorrow. So let's see. I woke up, I felt fine. It felt like I'd done nothing, and I started walking up the stairs, couldn't tell the difference. I started taking 2 steps at a time, and I noticed like, oh, okay, there's something in my hamstrings are sort of talking to me. There might be, it feels like there's something happened, but I could definitely do it again. I wasn't sore, I wasn't stiff. It wasn't limiting me in any way. And so I ended up going hiking with a friend sort of up a steep mountain incline, and it was about a 3-hour hike, quite a heavy hike. And I went back down, and I was just feeling so good. I said, right, it's time to play rugby again. And so I went to training that night with the professional team in Seattle, the Seattle Seawolves, and I felt great. They'd been training for the last few months that I'd been away in the refugee camps, and this was the first time I'd run really in a year, and I felt great. I was at a dead sprint. I was able to keep up with every play, every drill, and the scrimmage. So, and the next day I still wasn't sore. 2 days after that, I still wasn't sore. I could tell that like I had done a lot of work. There was just a sense there that my legs had done a lot of work. And I went with a friend to meet for coffee that I hadn't seen in a while. So I said, okay, we'll meet for coffee. And I said, okay. And I just started doing carnivore again for the second time. This was 5 years ago. And so I said, okay, well, I'll try some coffee and I'll see what that does to me. If that causes a problem. Or if I can drink coffee. So I tried 1 cup of black coffee, and within 20 minutes, I could actually feel my hamstrings and my back getting sore and stiff. And I was like, what is happening? It was very confusing, but I could feel it happening in real time. And I ended up being sore for 2 days after that. And so that was just 1 cup of coffee. I was not anywhere close to as sore as I should have been for doing that amount of exercise. But before that, I wasn't sore at all. And so I was like, okay, right, no coffee. And but it's an absolutely game-changing experience eating the way that we're biologically adapted to eat, because our bodies work so dramatically different. This is not a small difference. This is not like, well, yeah, you get a bit different. Oh, but I feel good and this is working for me. No, you have no idea. If you have not done this, and if you have not done this for a few months and gotten all that garbage out of your system, it takes about 2 weeks to get that out of your system. It takes alcohol about 3 weeks to get out of your system. And giving your body its actual fuel, you have no idea what this is. This is absolutely revolutionary. And in fact, just being in ketosis or in a ketogenic diet for sort of 2-3 months, you actually increase the health and number of your mitochondria in your cells that produce the energy for the functioning of your cells. But they do so much more. They actually run your cells. And so, now you'll have there are studies that actually show that being in ketosis for a number of months, you end up getting 4 times the amount of mitochondria in your cells, and they work 4 times as efficiently. So this is a massive, massive bonus to your energy and your athletic performance and your brain. Your brain just works better as well.
Yeah, amazing. And about the the recovery time, I felt exactly the same. I felt like I was being fooled a bit when I was educated, in the normal mainstream personal trainers school. So that's what I thought, that after when you take your muscles like to the point of maximum repetition, and also you have to rest for at least 1 day, maybe 2. And when I was younger, like that's exactly what I've done, because I knew I have the soreness, I have the the DOMS and all. And then I felt like I was fooled that I can that I never, I kind of, as you say, I never have to recover again, like from workouts. But as I understand, you don't differentiate too much between aerobic and anaerobic, like strength and aerobic. If someone is consulting with you, can I gain weight or not? But I think you will probably agree with me that people, maybe they are used to the the standard American diet or the Western diet, that in that diet, if you want to gain weight on any program, any, I don't know, strength program or bodybuilding, so you do it quite fast. And when you are on ketosis a lot, and when you based on animal protein and a lot of protein and fat, so I think things take a bit more time, and people are not that patient.
Yeah. So the thing is too, people will eat a lot of carbs, and a lot of bodybuilders and things like that now will just load up on a lot of carbs, and they think that helps them gain a lot of mass very quickly. And you can gain mass, but are you gaining lean muscle mass? That's the question, because that is what we want in the end. We want lean muscle mass. And well, you look at these bodybuilders, and a lot of times they'll have their bulking phase and their cutting phase. Well, they'll eat just tons and tons of carbs and tons of things, meat as well, certainly. Maybe not as fatty meat as they should be, but they still will eat meat. And then they'll go into their cutting phase, and then some of these guys, because they're just such large individuals, they can lose 80 pounds, and they get down much smaller than what they are. Well, they're not losing muscle. They're actually losing a lot of fat and glycogen and water weight that they never needed to have in the first place. If you eat carbohydrates, you can actually because the insulin goes up, insulin blocks a hormone called leptin, which is secreted from our adipose tissue, our fat cells, and that goes to your brain and tells your brain how much energy we have. It's also from the stretch receptors in your stomach, but most of it comes from your fat cells, and so that tells your brain how much fat and energy we have available to us. And so it's like a running gas gauge in your car. It just says, okay, yeah, we're full, we're fine, we don't need to eat anymore. Insulin blocks that, so now your brain thinks that we don't have as much energy, maybe you don't have any energy if your insulin is really high, and then your blood sugar is dropping because your insulin's up so high, and you get this panic every few hours that says you have to eat, you have to eat, you have to eat, and so we do, and we overeat that way, and so you're gonna put on fat. That's just all you're going to do. And also because your insulin is high, you're in a fat storage metabolism as opposed to a fat burning and utilizing metabolism. So you're going to put on fat, and you're going to store in glycogen, because again, your body's just trying to get this blood sugar out of your body as quickly as possible. And so it's storing it in muscle glycogen, it's storing it in liver glycogen, it's storing it in fat. It's just get out of here. But not just in your fat tissue, also in your muscles. So this is how we marble steaks, right? So we send a cow to a feedlot, and it eats a bunch of grains, and it gets that intramuscular fat, that marbling that we like because it tastes nice, right? Well, that's from the carbohydrates. That's from high blood sugar and high insulin, and forcing that into everywhere that it can, so it gets deposited in muscle as well. So that's happening to humans as well. And you can actually see this on MRI. You can actually see these muscle bodies with just a bunch of fat mixed in with it, right? So your muscles might look bigger, but a good proportion of that is actually fat. So you actually have, this is why we talk about gaining lean muscle mass, because without that intramuscular fat. So when you're eating carbohydrates, you're going to get that intramuscular fat. So your muscles might look bigger, but they are not bigger. That's not more muscle. That's fat inside the muscle, and you'll have fat on the outside of the muscle as well. And then you have all that glycogen as well, and one glycogen molecule will attract two water molecules in with it. So you'll have excess water weight. So you'll have it's fool's gold. It's not real. There's not real muscle mass, and that's why when you stop eating carbs and you start cutting down your calories, they lose 80 pounds, and then they get to be shredded. Well, you don't have to do that. You can just put on lean muscle mass all the time, and it's actually not that hard. I've been very surprised at how quickly and easily it is to put on weight. Now I've been very big. I've worked out. I've been going to the gym and working out and very, very consistently for about 30 years now. And so at my peak, I was probably 270 pounds. And that's how I would sort of start the rugby season. I'd be lifting a lot of weights and things like that. And then I'd sort of slim down to like 240, 245. That was usually my good playing weight, where I was like my fastest and biggest. And sometimes I wouldn't be able to maintain that, and I'd just be working out so much I just wouldn't be able to eat enough, and I'd lose more weight than that. But I've been quite big, and so maybe it's that I'm able to put on weight that my muscles already knew how to be that big. So and everybody's body is different, but for me, I've noticed that I can put on weight quite quickly. During COVID, all the gyms were locked down, which really bugged me because I actually had a home gym in Seattle, and I just moved to Australia, and I just kept thinking about like my damn gym like right there, and I can't use it. I was so upset.
You should have imported the gym to Australia.
Well, that was the thing. It was I wouldn't have been able to send it all, but I was looking into like buying equipment, but everybody did it. Everyone went nuts. Like everybody in Australia has a home gym now, and and so
Sure.
these things were on back order for 2 months, and their prices were 3 times as high. So I just
Wow.
said forget it. But I slimmed down quite a bit, but I still look very muscular. I was still very lean just by eating meat and only eating meat, not eating carbs. I don't store fat, and so I stay at or below 10% body fat at all times, regardless of if I'm working out or not. And people would even comment on that at the hospital, saying, how do you there's no gyms. How do you work out? You have a home gym. How do you even have time to? You're always here at the hospital. And I had to tell them, I was like, look, I don't actually work out at all. This is just diet. This is 100% diet. They just couldn't wrap their heads around that. But it's true. And I'd lose some weight, I'd lose some mass, but I would stay as lean. I would still stay very muscular as well. But I was down to like 95 kilos, which is actually quite light for me. I'm normally sort of like 110. And so 95 is quite light for me. But I think I was actually 93 at the end of COVID. But I maintained just right there, 93 to 95, just right around there. And as soon as COVID, some of the restrictions started lightening up and the gym started reopening, I was like, right, the day that gym opens, I'm back in there and I'm going to start doing my normal like lifting schedule that I did when I was a professional athlete, and it was minimum 4 days a week, if not more. And so I got back in and I just did that, and so I was working out 4 days a week religiously, sometimes 5 or 6 days a week, and even if it was just for like an hour or 90 minutes, I made sure that I got into the gym and did something. And even doing that, even though I wasn't working out for as long as I normally would, because sometimes I would work out for 3 or 4 hours, just because I had the time to. In my home gym, I did that. I would still get in for 60 to 90 minutes. So even just that, even just doing those workouts, but consistently, after 5 weeks, I went from 93 kilos to 105 kilos. Right.
Wow.
So
Only
yeah,
from animal-based food.
that's it. Only eating meat, and just working out, pushing myself hard, just lifting weights. I wasn't really running or anything like that. Just like a warm up on the exercise bike, and and just eating enough meat because my appetite doubled. I was eating twice as much meat as I was before, and I was just taking that meat and putting that in, and that just went right into making meat on my body. And so in 5 weeks of working out hard and eating as much meat as my body wanted to, so everything was enjoyable. I wasn't force feeding myself chicken breasts or anything awful like that. I was enjoying every single bite of steak that I had, and the fattiness is a big part of that. Fat is flavor. Any chef can tell you that. And so if I was able to eat as much as my body wanted me to, which was literally double, so it was like 2+ kilos of very fatty ribeye a day. I was just stacking on weight, and so I gained 12 kilos in 5 weeks, and that people would say that's not possible or on steroids or this. No, it's it is possible. I did it, and B, I wasn't on steroids, so I wasn't even taking supplements. I wasn't even taking over-the-counter workout supplements. I wasn't taking protein shakes or pre-workout or post-workout. Nothing. I was just working out, eating meat, drinking water. That's it. So for people that don't do kilos, that's like 25 pounds, maybe even a bit above 25 pounds, and between 25 and 30 pounds is 12 kilos. So it's a significant amount of weight in a very short period of time.
Yeah, it's a lot. And you don't take any supplements, right? That's another thing I wanted to ask you about the organs belief that people have nowadays. You don't do that also, right? You just steak and salt, I assume.
That's it. Yeah, just meat, salt, water. So if people want to eat organs, that's fine. But I try to think of this in relation to the entire animal. If we're thinking about eating naturally, if you take down a buffalo and like a full-grown buffalo, that is enough meat to feed you for 2 years, realistically. And how many livers does it have? It's just got the one, right? So once you get through that liver, you'd have no more liver for the next 2 years, right? So, you have hundreds of pounds of skeletal muscle, meat, and fat to every 1 pound of liver. And so that just, so you shouldn't be eating out of that proportion, I don't think.
That's a good point, actually.
Yeah. So, you know, and you know, and it may be beneficial to eat liver. It's very nutrient dense. You know, if you're eating a standard diet, a standard American diet, standard Western diet, or even a processed garbage diet, you know, liver is probably your best friend because you're going to be pretty nutrient deprived. And so eating liver regularly is probably a very good idea. And, you know, if you're coming from that diet and you're trying to catch up on nutrients, you know, having some liver at first is probably a good idea. Eventually it'll stop tasting good. It'll stop, you just like, oh, I don't really want to eat that. That's actually you know, a feedback from your body saying that you don't need those nutrients. You know, when I say I eat as much meat as I want to, it's literally that. I eat when it tastes good. As soon as it stops tasting good, I stop, because you're getting a positive feedback when your body wants those nutrients. As long as you're not eating, you know, sugar and carbs and all that sort of stuff, that disrupts your signals. But if you are eating what you're actually supposed to eat, like all other animals in the wild on their natural diet, they will have an automatic tell. You know, nature is natural; it just happens on its own. So, you know, a koala is not pulling out a calculator to figure out its macros. You know, it's just eating while it tastes good, and then goes like, "Yeah, I'm not really interested anymore." And same with a lion, same with us. And so I eat steak. You know, so by definition, I never get tired. People say that all the time. It's like, oh, don't you get sick of eating the same thing? Like, absolutely not. You know, because by definition, if I'm hungry, that will taste good. And then I'll eat until it stops tasting good, right? Because if a steak doesn't taste good, you're not hungry. But if it does taste good, you are. And so you should listen to that. And, you know, you ask people as well, you know, oh, do you get tired of that? It's like, does a cow get tired of grass? Does a lion get sick of gazelle? Like, no, like that's what they want to eat. That's all they want to eat. And this is all I want to eat. And so, yeah, no, you don't need to take supplements if you're eating your biologically appropriate diet by definition, right? You know, you should be like, you know, we're not giving B12 injections to panda bears and things like that. You know, I mean, they get everything that they need from bamboo, right? So if you need to take supplements, then by definition, your diet is deficient, right? And so a carnivore diet isn't. And you look at different populations such as, you know, the Inuit especially, they eat a lot of marine mammal like predators. So they'll eat a lot of seals and polar bears and things like whales even. And they don't eat those organs. They feed those to their dogs. And if you get, you know, if you eat even, you know, a moderate amount of seal liver, that you can get vitamin A toxicity. Any amount of polar bear liver will kill you from vitamin A toxicity. So, you know, if people are eating, you know, cow liver, it doesn't have nearly as much vitamin A as those animals do. However, it has a lot more than your skeletal muscle. And so, you know, having a regular supply of liver and just a ton of liver and out of proportion with the animal, you can run into problems because it is nutrient dense. And the problem with nutrient density is if it's more dense than you need, it will become toxic. And vitamin toxicity is just as dangerous as vitamin deficiency.
Yeah, that leads me to my next question. That I'm really curious to hear your opinion about it as also as a clinician that you have this experience. But you know that nowadays, I'm sure you know. I saw that you also talked about Paul Saladino. But also a lot of people that doing similar diet, like the animal-based diet. You know that it's full of organs, but also fruits. So I think these people, they get a lot of vitamins daily, and that actually contradicts. And I couldn't agree with you more about the hunting simulation, that it's like, I mean, that when you compare it to hunter-gatherer, so when they get a big animal, it could last for years even. And I don't think there wasn't any evolutionary point that we had, you know, like a everyday liver and steak just to get out of the fridge, just ready to go, ready to put on the pan. So, and I think, like, I have a assumption, I wonder what you think about it, that these people now, you can see that problems like iron overload, and I see it a lot also in the groups here in Israel, and also from people that I work with. When we do low carb diet, I work with a lot of diabetics, and many of them, if they overdo it a bit, so they get some sort of iron overload, and also, you know, when sometimes like ferritin gets high in the blood and iron gets low, and there is kind of like absorption problem in that case, and people then go to phlebotomy, and I saw that Paul Saladino talked about it now, but many people before Paul Saladino also reached to those points, and I wonder what you see from your experience, like clinically and on yourself, from all these iron issues, that I think iron can tell us a lot more than we think it can, because, you know, the body regulates the iron like every second, every hour, and the body has a really good reason if it puts iron into ferritin, and I wonder what you think about it.
Well, yeah, well, the iron levels and ferritin levels, and there's different ways of testing iron. There's multiple different ways of testing iron and iron, binding capacity, and how you're stored, because you can actually sequester iron in your bone marrow and things like that, try to hide it away, and for different reasons, and then have it bring it out. And ferritin, of course, can change dramatically depending on what you're doing. Ferritin is actually quite useful as an acute phase reactant, meaning that if you have a lot of inflammation in your body, like an infection or some sort of autoimmune issue or similar, that your ferritin will raise and will go up. And so that can actually be a marker of not of just high iron, but of inflammation. And so that's I
wanted to say also. Sorry to interrupt you, about the inflammation, and also it can indicate about the past inflammation, right?
Yeah. So it's not something that you should just look at solely to consider your iron levels, because there are a lot of things that affect your ferritin levels, and so you need to get a complete iron profile and panel to see exactly what's going on, to see if you're sequestering it, you just not have enough, and if you're or if you have too much or whatever. But if you're iron overloaded, that shows up in different ways. People with hemochromatosis have specific problems that you can test for and you can see clinically. And people in doing carnivore tend to not have those issues, even if their iron is sort of slightly high or elevated or more elevated than they have been, or maybe their ferritin's up or something like that. They don't actually display the clinical issues. Some may have an issue, but I don't work with people with hemochromatosis myself, but I know that Dr. Sean Baker has collected over 10,000, probably over 15,000 different points of data, so different patient data and profiles, and they have people with hemochromatosis, and actually what they're finding is that actually their hemochromatosis actually improves on a red meat and water diet. So they're saying, like, oh, you're getting more iron, that should make your hemochromatosis worse. In fact, it's making it better, and that doesn't. I can't explain why that would be. However, just from a thought from a thought exercise point of view, you could see how that would make sense. If you're eating what you're supposed to eat and your biological processes are now working properly, you will likely be able to regulate your minerals and vitamins and other nutrients better. And so it's just like all these other so-called chronic diseases that I think are toxicities and malnutrition. You're eating the wrong thing, and this is changing around and damaging your biochemical processes. And so hemochromatosis could very well be something like that. We'll have to wait and see, and obviously do experiments and things like that. But anecdotally, there are people that have improved on that. There's a lot of other people that improve in dramatic different ways as well, that we really wouldn't have thought so. Like people with Huntington's disease, that was thought to be just like pretty much you have that gene, you will get that disease. And people have actually been improving from going on a meat and water diet. Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, having loose joints and connective tissue problems, even just not even going full carnivore, but just eating a lot more meat actually helps stop that. I have a patient actually that has Ehlers-Danlos, and after 3 months of going on carnivore, he stopped having any symptoms of Ehlers-Danlos. So he said every single day that he would wake up, he would have his shoulder would be out of socket, or one of his joints, a finger, a toe, something would be out of joint every day. And so he would have to sort of see, okay, what's out of place today, and you have to pop it back into place and relocate it, reduce the dislocation. And he said that a couple months into carnivore, he had no dislocations, and he has not had any dislocations since. And so this is a very, very, very interesting. It's just very interesting to see how much improvements people can get.
Amazing. So for you, you see it as a default, kind of a default diet to begin with, for any kind of circumstance. Like for me, obviously, as a type 1 diabetic, like I got to it. I had a journey with it. I first read Dr. Bernstein's book, and I was really strict on that, and then I developed to carnivore, and then I added some stuff. Like I did a lot of experiments, but for me, it was like a kind of a necessity, and that really I gained control over my life and over my everyday feelings, like over my body, my everything, and my blood glucose, which is the base for everything, actually. But I mean for like everyday kind of cases, like a woman come to you at the menopause, I don't know, and she just wanna improve some hormones and maybe get in better shape, like, or so you will suggest it to her, and it's the same way as you will tell to a adolescent, maybe with some protein adjustments, or like a young guy. I mean, that's your kind of a way to go.
Yeah, so I think that this is appropriate, and not only appropriate but optimal for every single human being on Earth at any stage of their life. And that's just simply coming from a biological standpoint that apart from weaned individuals, right? If you're on breast milk, you need to be on breast milk for a certain amount of time. Once you come off of that, look at every mammal on Earth. When they stop breastfeeding, they start eating the food that the adults eat, and all of the adults and children that are weaned eat the exact same thing, right? They're all eating. Elephants are all eating the same thing. Lions are all eating the same thing. Chimpanzees, they're all eating the same thing. Maybe there's a bit of variation here and there, because actually some, more and more chimpanzees are hunting, and certain chimpanzees in certain areas are hunting more, and eating other chimpanzees, eating other monkeys, or eating monkeys. And dolphins, they're eating the same thing, right? So whales, they're eating the same thing. So this is what we should be doing too. We don't have multiple stages of what we should do, and at this period in these circumstances we should be eating X, and this period in these circumstances we should be eating Y. That only applies to breast milk and then post weaning meals. And so someone who's a child who's growing, they need to be on fatty meat, because that's going to be the best nutrition for them, for their brain and their bodies to develop. We actually, our brains have been growing over the last sort of 8 million years, and pretty steadily for about 6 million of those years. And then about 2 million years ago, it sharply increases, almost like an exponential growth. It's the fastest growth in brain size of anything we've ever seen in the fossil record. And so there's this exponential growth up to where we are today. And then when you right around the agricultural revolution, there's a sharp jag down, like literally straight down. And we lost 11% of our cranial capacity, of our brain size, since the agricultural revolution, right? So really about 10,000 years ago, 15,000 years ago, our brains were 11% larger on average than they are now.
That's
right?
crazy.
That is crazy. Right. So we think we're so smart. We're so this, all those backwards people, this, that, and the other. We have more technology. They were smarter. The ones that could actually eat meat. A lot of the peasants and things like that, they weren't able to afford meat. They were poor. And so that's why they were pretty unhealthy. But, the nobility, the top classes, they knew how important meat was, and they would get a lot of that. But that was still in past agricultural. But like the caveman days, they were much smarter. They had much more capacity for learning and thought than we did. We just know more, right? But they could do more with much less. And that's something that we can get back. There are some epigenetic changes and things like that. There's an experiment with Dr. Pottenger back in, I think, the 20s and 30s, and he did this with cats, and he found that just feeding them raw meat versus cooked meat.
Yeah, I know. Potenger, right?
Yeah, Pottenger. Yeah, oh, have you seen his stuff?
I know.
Yeah,
I read his stuff. Really
yeah.
good.
So yeah, very, very interesting. So for people who don't know, he just looked at this for cooked and versus uncooked, and he found that the uncooked, the raw meat, was much better for them, and they're much healthier generationally, and they were very, very healthy generation after generation. They were getting fully formed skulls and zygomatic hearts, which is cheekbones, and brains and body size. And that the cooked meat group, it wasn't even like the plant-based kibble nonsense that we feed them now, but just meat, but just cooked meat. They were less healthy. They were less interested in mating and reproduction, and and then the next generation, they were actually smaller. Their brains were smaller. Their zygomatic arch wasn't fully developed. Their bone mineral
after one
density,
generation, right?
One generation, yeah, and one generation, their bone mineral density went from 14% down to 7%, so it halved. Right, so that's quite significant. They're even less interested in mating and normal behavior. They weren't as active and playful. They were smaller as well. And then the third generation, they were even smaller brains, even less developed facial features, and even small. And their bone mineral density went down to 3%. So it was actually soft. Their bones were soft. And they said it was like this consistency of like a foam rubber sort of thing, which is just terrible to think about. And they were getting all these fractures and things like that. So it was this knock-on effect generation after generation. And they found that after 3 generations, they couldn't reproduce, right? So they either couldn't they couldn't conceive in the first place, or if they did, they couldn't bring them to term, or they were stillborn. They didn't get a single live 4th generation cat. And then they flipped it back and said, okay, well, can we reverse this? Start giving those 3rd generation cats raw meat and see how they go. And they were able to breed them back to the fully developed, bigger brain, better developed facial features and all the other characteristics of the raw meat cats. They were able to do that, but it took 4 generations. So there's these epigenetic effects. There's these signals that tell your DNA which genes to turn on and off, right? So it's not just like you have these genes, you don't have these genes. You need to tell them to turn on and off at different times. So that's epigenetics. And so you're getting these signals, and that can actually have knock-on effects generationally, right? So it's not just you go back to doing the right thing and everything's okay. No, actually. So even us that we're now carnivores, we're probably not going to be as benefited by that as our children will be if they're raised as full carnivores and develop as full carnivores. And they won't be as good as their children, and probably their children, but they will be a lot better off. And
they will be from day one also.
Yeah, exactly.
That's actually, I know a lot of Pottenger's work, and a lot of the things that you say, I wanted to tell you a couple of minutes ago that it really correlates with Pottenger and his kind of a teacher, Dr. Weston A. Price. That for me, Dr. Weston A. Price, that's a real science. Like it's not like today, you have a lot of RCT and people they want to say RCT like to kind of like tell you, okay, shut up, I have a RCT to show a different thing, but they don't really check who gave the money for that for this RCT or another one. And Dr. Weston A. Price and also Pottenger, it was like that's real science. It's like they go and they observe. That's the best science I think there is. And like Dr. Weston A. Price, he said that with, as you said, for women that after birth, that when they breastfeed, so there used to be like a whole protocol in the tribes that they actually breastfeed, and then the woman, they get the most nutrient dense food in the tribe, and then when they finish, the child immediately get on again, like the child that finished breastfeed, so he will get the most nutrient dense food, and everything was going towards him, like all the resources of the tribe, like for nutrition wise. So and that makes a lot of sense.
It does, yeah. Especially because when you're extremes of age, you need the most help, right? So when you're developing and you're very young, you really need a lot of you need the top nutrition. When you're getting older and your body's not as robust and and capable of dealing with stress, then you also need that as well. And so, yeah, that's the thing. I think that is real science as well. You're looking at real world results, right? You're not having a theory. You have 13 people and 7 people, and you sort of look at this and you just make all these conclusions that may not be borne out statistically, with your data set. But it doesn't matter either way. They can have all the RCTs that they want. They can have all the studies that they want, all the epidemiological, surveys of health and things like that they want. But what matters is what happens in the real world, right? And so, observing that, saying, okay, these people are doing this, and what are they doing? Okay, it's going exactly the opposite of what you suggested. Okay, so that's wrong, right? And that's
exactly
that's what the physicist Richard Feynman said famously, is that it doesn't matter how brilliant your theory is, and it doesn't matter how smart you are. If it doesn't agree with experiment, it's wrong. Okay, and so they're saying it's like, oh well, no, this wouldn't happen, and it's all so much better to have plant this and this, that, and the other. And then you have Weston Price go down there on the ground, seeing this in real time, seeing the exact opposite. It's wrong, and so that's just all there is. And
that's real science.
It is, yeah, and people hang their hats on the RCTs. Oh, where's the randomized control trial? And that's fine. When you're looking at different sorts of studies, you have some sort of epidemiological survey, or you have, a properly controlled randomized control trial with enough numbers and it's well done and performed. Yeah, I'm going to take the RCT over the survey any day, right?
True.
But there is evidence that exists outside of the randomized controlled diet, right? This is something that was actually demonstrated to us in medical school, saying that, hey, look, RCTs are great and all, but they're not the only thing out there. You can't just live your life on RCTs. Famous example of that is parachutes, right? There's no RCTs to show the parachutes work. Okay, there is no evidence that parachutes work then, right? Well, no, we have evidence because we have eyes and we're not stupid. So so because there's no randomized controlled trial that shows that parachutes work, are you going to not use a parachute because there's just no high level evidence to show that parachutes work? Well, my eyes are pretty high level evidence, and I can see that it works, and I can see the alternative.
Exactly.
And, but if they want to sign up for RCT, for parachute, maybe get a dud parachute. I mean, they're welcome to do that. But I think I'll just use parachutes.
Good luck with that. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
But that's exactly that. That's what sometimes bothers me. I soon to be a clinical nutritionist, and of course my studies and all, they are based a lot of RCTs. But sometimes when I get to an RCT that it doesn't correlate with what I do, and I can prove it by just people can come to see me at my office or at my everyday work and I think also Dr. Bernstein also proved it a lot, the type 1 diabetic that is now 89 almost years old, that he still works and all. And he also, most of the RCTs today, and the trials will say that he should have died when he was 30, and now he's 89 living a low carb diet for, I don't know, 60 years or something like that. And many times I see it also, I had an argument with someone from class, people got to my Instagram and all, and they start to argue about artificial sweeteners, and if they cause it's not for our subject, but if they cause reactive hypoglycemia or not. And they showed me RCTs and all, and I told them, look, I've seen the studies, I know, but if you check my blood glucose, before artificial sweetener and after, I will show you reactive hypoglycemia. That it just, I will show you with your eyes. You don't need any study for that. And then
that's it. Yeah.
You can say to everyone, also in your practice, if some patient come to you and tell you, no, I'm not sure about the carnivore diet because there is this trial, but you tell him, okay, you can try 1 month and come back to me and you will see yourself with time.
Well, that's it. And that's what Richard Feynman was getting at, that, is just that we have this theory. Einstein did this as well. He would, think he would prove something mathematically Say, okay, now let's go test it, because he always tested it. And that's the thing. There are a lot of people that think, oh, well, because this is the sort of the method that Einstein did. He would prove something mathematically and then he'd go, but that's not it. He would actually go and he would look for evidence to test that against, right? And if it didn't match up with what he observed in the real world, he would throw it out because it was wrong, right? Because he had this and he proved it mathematically, and he's Albert Einstein, so this guy's pretty on top of things. But he was on top of things enough to recognize that if it didn't matter how beautiful his theory was and his math was, it's not lining up with reality. So it's wrong. And so, you don't know why. There's something else. He just doesn't know. There's something else going on here that's contributing to this that I'm unaware of. So, my math is incomplete, right? And so he was smart enough to be aware of that. Other people are not. Other people say, like, well, I proved this mathematically, therefore it's correct. It's like, well, but you're seeing the evidence against that. And then they'll come up with reasons as to why that's not the case. They make up fudge factors and things like that. And there's a lot of that in math and physics, but there's a lot more of it in medicine. And so, people just live and die by these studies, and they forget what is actually happening with an actual patient in the actual world. And that is the only thing that matters. And so, you having those experiences, you say, look, when I take this, this is what happens. And I have people tell me, like, coffee's not bad for you, it has all these good effects, there's all these studies. I'm like, okay, that's fine. And if you want to drink coffee, you can. But when I drink coffee, I have this effect. I get sore for 2 days. I don't want to be sore for 2 days. And that tells me that there's something going on causing inflammation in my body. And there are a lot of documented, well-known, and established plant defense chemicals in coffee. And so, that's going to be me. When I drink coffee, I feel worse. So I'm not going to drink coffee. And what this study says, like, okay, good for your study, but in real life, that's not the case. And I absolutely see patients in clinic who have constant glucose monitors. When they take in artificial sweeteners, it absolutely affects their blood sugar.
Exactly. Yeah, it kind of it fools this mechanism of insulin and all, and it's like it messes it up a bit. But with coffee, that's interesting. Like, I think coffee it's like a gray area in our diet, but I believe that sometimes the craving for coffee can hide some deeper energy crisis. You know what I mean? That you see it a lot in, I think, people that they do the carnivore diet or the ketogenic diet. They do it not so correctly, and then they get all these cravings because they lack of energy. You know what I mean?
Yeah, well, yeah, you can, and of course, coffee, it's in and of itself is addictive as well, the caffeine, and so and people get very used to just having that morning cup of coffee, having that ritual, and getting a bit of a wake up, and it's nice, and then you start your day sort of on a good foot. But you actually feel much better when you don't use that at all, but you have to get through sort of the withdrawals as well. And when people, there can be a chain of things. People will say they're doing a carnivore diet, but really what they mean is they're eating a lot more meat and they're cutting out a lot of other things. Really what they're doing is like a heavily meat-based ketogenic diet. And sometimes people aren't even doing a ketogenic diet. People that eat honey and fruit, they're not even doing keto, right? They're eating a lot of meat, but they're also eating sugar and carbs. A lot of those things are going to mess with your results and mess with how good you feel. If you're eating any amount of carbs, that's going to raise your insulin. That's going to make it so you have higher blood sugar, but then that's going to decline because your insulin is going to stay up longer than your blood sugar will. And so you're going to feel tired. So I know people that will still be drinking milk and they're just like, oh, I just have horrible energy. I just have such bad energy on a carnivore diet. I hate it. And I find out that they're drinking, a couple glasses of milk. Well, what that's going to do is it's going to raise your insulin enough that you're going to kick you out of ketosis. You're not going to be able to mobilize your fat stores. And you're going to run out of those carbs, and now your blood sugar is going to go low. And when you have 1/3 of the glycogen stored in your muscles and your liver, and so you're going to run out of energy quicker, and you're just going to you just feel tired and go to sleep. This is what, historically, people would have a glass of milk before bed to help them sleep. That's probably that mechanism, where they're having a bit of carbs, and it's just enough to just raise their insulin enough, and then drop their blood sugar so that they get lethargic and tired. And
it's a roller coaster.
It is, yeah, that's exactly it. Your blood sugar's going up and down and up and down, and your insulin's going up and down and up, or really up and up and up. And
Yeah.
so when you're eating a lot of fruit and you're eating a lot of honey, you're going to mess with your energy. And again, you're going to shut down your body's ability to mobilize fat and to run on the fat. And you're going to have to rely on your glycogen and blood sugar, which only has a limited capacity. So you're going to find that I need to eat more, I need to eat more. And this is why you see people that are eating carbohydrates on a carnivore diet, they steadily increase their carbohydrate load. I mean, a lot of people have, like a bit of fruit and some honey, and then they're like, oh, it's just not really helping with my energies. And they find that I feel better when I'm eating more carbs. Well, of course you do. You feel better if you're doing more Coke too. This is like you're feeding a problem that's not like an addiction, right? So that's the problem with carbohydrates, is that you start eating carbohydrates, you're locked in. You have to keep eating carbohydrates because you can't mobilize your fat stores. So eating a low carb, like some carbs, I think is you feel worse than no carbs, because if you're no carbs, then your body is actually mobilizing your fat stores. If you're low carbs, then you're done. You've raised your insulin and you've blocked that process. And so you have to start eating more carbs. I find that as well when people, start going back to carbs, like, oh, I feel so much better. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
For now. And then you start eating more carbs and more carbs and more carbs, and you end up putting on weight and not doing as well. And you have to keep feeding the beast. You have to keep feeding carbohydrates to yourself. That idea, we talked about before, you have to eat carbs in order to burn carbs. There was an interesting study that I read from 1981 looking at wolves, because that was the argument back then. You have to eat carbs in order to burn carbs. And they're like, well, wolves don't carbo load for 10 hours before they chase before they don't carbo load before they chase caribou for 10 hours. So do they have blood sugar? Do they have glycogen? Do they have liver glycogen? And they found out, yes, they do. And it's rock solid. It does not change no matter what they're doing. If they're at rest, running, chasing, eating, killing, before they eat, after they eat, it is here. It is always here. And so, and we've known this in humans as well. You talk about people talking about, how best to treat type 1 diabetes and this, that, and the other. And the argument is that, you have to eat carbohydrates as a type 1 diabetic, or else you'll get hypoglycemic and you can die. This is very dangerous. So you need to eat carbs. Okay, but why are you taking the insulin then? You're taking the insulin so that you can utilize the blood sugar, and so they don't get too high. Okay, but now you have to give yourself more carbohydrates so you don't get too low. Okay, well, take less insulin, first of all, right? And because
Exactly.
you don't, there's just sort of you're just sort of like,
It's a vicious cycle.
yeah, that's it. You're taking in carbohydrates because you're taking insulin, but then you need more insulin. Oh, so I need more carbs, and you just keep doing this and keep doing this and keep doing this, and you can keep your blood sugar sort of here, but you're eating a lot more carbs and you're taking a lot more insulin, and that's a problem. We've actually been treating type 1 and type 2 diabetes for well over 100 years. I think it actually started back in the 1800s, putting people on a ketogenic diet, around 100 years anyway, that we've been treating people with this. And they found that it actually just really stabilizes your blood sugar. So you even a type 1 diabetic, you need generally, people just need a background dose, the basal dose, like a long-acting insulin at a very low dose that will just sort of...
That's technical.
Yeah, and so I don't know...
Like the amount you just keep, in order to keep it in line, and so it, as you say, it won't fall and won't go up, but as soon as you get the doses right, so... It's the same as you doing carnivore. Like I'm doing carnivore and my blood sugar stay between 70 to 100. Like, it's becoming simple.
Yeah, exactly. And so, you just take the set dose of insulin. You don't have to take the fast acting 15 minutes before you have a meal, and you're doing that 3 times a day and doing all that stuff. And you're constantly having to figure this thing out. You take one shot once a day and that's it. You don't have to worry about it. And type 2 diabetics, it's even better. You can actually eat, even insulin dependent type 2 diabetics, a lot of them can come off the insulin in a few months. We've seen this in clinical practice. And in fact, we do have randomized control trials showing that. It's showing that you can cure type 2 diabetes by putting someone on a ketogenic diet. That's the work of Professor Steve Finney. Like he's actually done randomized controlled trials with with large numbers, showing with statistical significance that you can reverse type 2 diabetes completely in many cases, and actually get insulin dependent diabetics off of insulin, right? So to the point, to the extent that this is actually in the diabetes treatment guidelines in Australia, and the Australian medical board have actually sort of railed against doctors advocating ketogenic diet for their patients. Now it's actually in the official recommendations for treating diabetics. Nice. is a ketogenic diet. So that just shows you how the progress we've made with this as well. But it's very, very, very effective.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, that's the good news actually to finish with, that also everywhere around the world. Also, it's still not it's not recommended like officially, but they put it in their in the list of diets, like also in here in the Diabetes Association. And that's it's good news, but still, of course, like the official guidelines also in my country and in Australia or in the US, there is still to rely on carbs, and to also that you can avoid hypoglycemia. So the doctors put you like on a higher baseline of blood glucose, just so you never get near to the lows. But then the tragedy is that you go with too high all the time.
Yeah.
So but there is still things to change, of course. But I think we covered a lot of these subjects. And Dr. Anthony Chaffee, I thank you for the time, and I hope that I wish that there were more doctors like you also in my country and your country.
Well, thank you. Well, thank you very much. It's been a pleasure, and happy to talk anytime.